Most recently, he co-hosts Connected Coast to Coast, a daily issue-oriented talk show for MSNBC, where he remains a frequent analyst on Hardball with Chris Matthews. Over the years, he has written for a number of publications, including Esquire, Newsweek, and The New Yorker. Please help me welcome Ron Reagan.
Thank you very much. By the way, if any of you are curious how long it takes to drive from Seattle to Olympia in rush hour traffic, I have the answer. You don't want to know. All right, so politics and the media, that's going to keep you busy. I guess you've been busy for the last few days or whatever, delving into that. I don't profess to be, thank you. I don't profess to be an expert on either of those institutions, either government or the media. On the other hand, I have spent about 20 years or so working in and around the news media, and one of my relatives indeed was involved with politics. So I guess I have some perspective there. You have probably noticed, thinking about politics and the media, politicians, journalists, the government, the news business, you've probably noticed already that there are similarities in these two institutions. On the one hand, they are both vital to a thriving democracy. You need government and you need the press. Can't do without government. Somebody's got to take your tax money and then misspend it, and that would be government. It's your job to hold the government's feet to the fire if you're a journalist. Some people say, well, you know, times like this we just have to trust our leaders. No, 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 no. You never just trust your leaders. And you go back and you look at what Thomas Jefferson wrote and Washington and all the other people, Ben Franklin. No, no, you never just trust your leaders. And it is the journalist's role to ask difficult questions, to get in the face of government officials and hold them to account. All right, we don't have much time here. There's a lot of stuff to cover. I'm just going to make a few points, and if we have any time left over afterwards and you want to ask questions, I'll do my best to answer them. But, all right, so both vital institutions. There are other similarities. Politicians and journalists tend to have a pretty high opinion of themselves. This is not a sentiment shared by the general public. Poll after poll, popularity polls show that both politicians and journalists rank somewhere below the guy who comes to repo your car. Although they are both slightly above actual terrorists, which I guess is something to brag about. The feeling is mutual, I might say. The politicians, or people that run the political industry, and people who run the news industry, how should I put this? They think you're dumb. Really. And they act accordingly. They think you're stupid. They think you're intellectually lazy. They think you want to sit on your couch and stuff your face full of pizza. That's what they, and they act like that. That's the stuff they dish up to you. Intellectually lazy people who sit on their couch and stuff their face with pizza. That's what you get. Okay? Keep that in mind. Now, a lot of this, the disenchantment with politicians and journalists comes down to trust. You don't trust them, and you shouldn't trust them. Now, we're not supposed to trust government, but we hope that we can trust journalists to at least be doing their job, but that's not always the case. Quick show of hands, how many people think that you can basically trust what you're getting, say, in your evening news at night? How many people think you can basically trust that? Basically trust. How many think that you, show of hands, can't trust? It's about 50-50. Okay. That was a trick question. You're both right. It depends. If Brian Williams of NBC tells you that a warehouse burnt down in St. Louis, you can take that to the bank. They love burning warehouses. I can't tell you how many times we had to preempt our show. We had topics all picked out because something caught fire in some Midwestern city. They put the choppers in the air. They've got pictures. Things are blowing up. And you spend an hour with a warehouse that's burning in St. Louis. But if it's something that requires context, if it's something that requires analysis and investigation, then we get into trouble. Then maybe you can't trust what you hear in the news, at least not if it's just one source. Examples. Well, the biggest story of the last few years is, of course, the Iraq War. Now, you'd expect the media to be holding the government's feet to the fire over the Iraq War. We know now that the rationales for going to war have mostly proven false. No WMD, no connection to al-Qaeda in Iraq, no Saddam Hussein was not responsible for 9/11. And the media pretty much fell down on the job reporting about that. In fact, they not only didn't do their jobs asking the tough questions, they sometimes colluded with the government in this. This is not what journalists are supposed to do. I'll give you an example of how this works, or can work anyway. In the run-up to the war, before we actually invaded, stories began to circulate that Iraq, Saddam Hussein, had bought aluminum tubes. Aluminum tubes. These aluminum tubes were said to be just the sort of aluminum tubes that one would put in a centrifuge if one had a nuclear weapons program. So the tubes meant nuclear program in Iraq. Now, the CIA was telling the White House that this isn't really true. These don't really look like those kind of tubes. The White House didn't want to hear that. Not only didn't they want to hear that, they wanted to tell people the opposite. So they went to various journalists. They went to the New York Times, for instance, and they said, just background here, on the QT, you need to know this. It's a big scoop. Aluminum tubes. Saddam, he's got the nuclear program. And the New York Times thought, oh my God, this is a huge story. And somebody else could do this first. It could be on the front page of the Washington Post. So they rushed into print. Aluminum tubes in Iraq. Front page story, above the fold, aluminum tubes. Nuclear program in Iraq. Well, that's bad enough. But it doesn't stop there. The same week that the New York Times prints a story saying aluminum tubes, nuclear program in Iraq, Vice President Dick Cheney goes on to meet the press. And he tells Tim Russert, I know, Tim, they found the aluminum tubes. Iraq has been buying the aluminum tubes. We think it's a nuclear program. And don't believe me, but the New York Times has reported this. So you know it's got to be true, right? The whole circle comes full circle there. Now, it's a little surprising because you think the New York Times is supposed to be liberal and they're supposed to hate the Bush administration, and they should have been right on top of that and investigating. If they called their sources to the CIA, they might have heard that the tubes, it's no good. But they didn't, which brings up the question of bias in the media. Now, another set of questions here. How many people think that the mainstream media, the major networks, major papers, et cetera, have a liberal bias? Show of hands. Liberal bias, mainstream media, okay. How many people think that the mainstream media has a conservative bias? It's another trick question. You're both right and you're both wrong. It may be true that most journalists working for mainstream publications, networks, what have you, are themselves liberal-ish. In fact, I can probably tell you with 99% certainty that most journalists, producers, editors in the mainstream media are, well, I know they're registered Democrats in the majority, but I can, that's just a fact. But I can say that they're probably socially liberal. They're pro-choice, they don't hate gay people, they believe in evolution, that sort of thing. How do I know that? Because there's a correlation between social liberalism and education, and most of those people are pretty well educated. The question is not what are their personal feelings about things like that, though. It's does that affect the way they cover stories? And that's a very different question. Now, we all have biases. We're all biased about stuff. We make judgments about things, all of us. It may be political, it may just be personal. I'll tell you a story from the 2004 campaign. I was working with MSNBC, mostly appearing on panels with Chris Matthews on his show Hardball. So it's the 2004 campaign, and we're covering the debates between Kerry and Bush. 3 debates. First debate, Kerry wins in a wipeout. There's Chris Matthews, he's hosting the show. There's me. There's usually a reporter who's going to be neutral. And then there's usually two people from the right, usually Pat Buchanan and Joe Scarborough. I don't know if you know them, but they're conservatives. They're very conservative. You notice that I'm the lone token liberal on that panel. Chris is also sort of center-left, but he tries to play it right down the middle. So, okay, so we're doing the debates. First debate comes along, Kerry wins. Everybody has to admit this. George W. Bush, for whatever reason, spends most of the debate looking like he's been hit upside the head with a sock full of pennies or something. He just, you know, he's like this, and everybody exclaims about this, and so Kerry wins the first debate. 1-0, Kerry. But a funny thing happens between the first and the second debates. The rules change. Now, Bush doesn't actually have to win the next debate to win the debate. He just has to improve his performance, and then he'll be declared the winner because he's like most improved debater. Sure enough, second debate comes along, and yeah, he's a little better this time, a little more comfortable, you know. And so everybody's acting like, well, I guess he won then, right? Well, on substance, Kerry won again. But that's not how it got played. So now you've got Kerry won, and I guess Bush won, which makes the third debate the rubber match, right? Third debate comes along, and once again, Kerry's wiping the floor with George W. Bush. Bush has improved his game, but Kerry's still better. He just has more command of the facts. But Kerry makes a huge mistake. Doesn't have anything to do with substance, of course. It's more of a stylistic thing. He's asked a direct question about same-sex marriage, and he brings up Dick Cheney's daughter, Mary, who happens to be gay. Ooh. And I can see Pat Buchanan and Joe Scarborough sit up in their chairs because they know they've got something they can hang Kerry with now. And they're reassured of that when after the debate, Lynn Cheney, Dick Cheney's wife, rushes to the stage, grabs somebody with a camera, and denounces Kerry as this horrible human being who's insulted her daughter. Now, never mind that her daughter's 35 years old, has been living with her partner for 15 years, and is openly gay. And he didn't say anything bad about her. He said nice things about her. But you don't want to bring somebody's kid into this, even if they're 35 years old. So now she's saying John Kerry has just disqualified himself from the presidency. He's a horrible guy. And Pat Buchanan and Joe Scarborough and everybody picks up on this. And for the next 2 weeks, all they're talking about is what a horrible guy John Kerry is for bringing this into the debate. And so he lost the debates. Now, factually and substantively, he won all 3 debates, but that gets buried in this one stylistic gaffe. So where's the bias there? Is it a right-wing bias? It's not left-wing bias, I guess. Or is it something else? Is it something more complicated? The fact of the matter is, as in the 2000 election with Al Gore, the journalists covering John Kerry's campaign didn't like him. And they just don't like him. He's kind of stiff, and he's stuffy, and he's stuck up, and they just don't like him. So they were more than eager to see him go down in flames. Not for political reasons, just personal reasons. They didn't like him. And this sort of thing happens. Now you're saying, okay, well, we can't really trust the media, and we can't figure out their biases. Those are sort of complicated. And I should add, too, that you know, the context for these debates in that election was also aftermath of 9/11, and the fact, more broadly, that for years the right had been bashing the media, telling them, you're left, you're biased, and people are straining to not be biased in any way if they're liberals. So add that to the personal bias against Kerry, and you've got a perfect storm gathering there. Okay, so you're saying we can't trust the media, and we can't figure out their biases, their personal biases. How are you gonna cope with that? But we can certainly rely on fair and balanced, right? As long as everything's fair and balanced, as long as both sides are represented in whatever issue, whatever argument there is, well, then at least we can decide what's true, right? Not quite.